SQL Server on AWS Technical Lab. Our presenters today are Senior Partner Solutions Architect at AWS, Tom Staab, co-founder and CTO of Stratus10, Kevin RisonChu, and assisting in the technical lab is Chris Darville, Senior Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. Our agenda will begin with Tom from AWS providing an overview of EC2 versus RDS. He'll then explain how the lab works and provide setup details to everyone. The bulk of the time will be spent with Tom leading you through the technical lab environment. Kevin from Stratus10 will provide insight into how companies work with AWS partners. Questions will be addressed throughout, plus we'll save a few minutes at the end for more Q&A. Before we dive in, we'd appreciate if you'd complete this very brief poll. It would just provide some additional insight to the presenters today. So questions are, where are you running your SQL Server workloads, on-prem, on AWS, or both? What percentage of SQL Server workloads are you running on-prem, more or less than 50%? And we're curious about your professional experience so far with AWS. Okay, it looks like we're mostly on-prem or mixed and not tons of SQL Server experience so far. Okay. Thanks so much for participating. All right, I'll now hand it over to Tom to get us started.
Thanks, Catherine. So I hope at least most of you, if not all of you, had an opportunity to join us at our previous webinar. We talked about running SQL Server on AWS and ways to do that and some of the advantages. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But as Catherine said, we're most of the time we want to provide time for you to work on, actually get some hands-on experience and work on the lab we have today. But as Catherine said, my name is Tom Staab. I've been working in IT for a long time, working with SQL Server for a long time. And I've been here at AWS for the past 6 years, still focused on SQL Server, but now with the focus on SQL Server on AWS. So with that in mind, if we just get right into it, you have two options for SQL Server on AWS. At a high level anyway, two options: Amazon EC2 and Amazon RDS, or as some people refer to it as infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. It comes under a lot of different labels, but the service names are Amazon EC2 and Amazon RDS. And it's not a matter of, one being better than the other. We have, some people prefer one over the other. Sometimes it's a workload decision. We have multiple customers that utilize both, as well as other databases on AWS. The decision process really comes down to the options that are available on each and what your needs are for your given situation. So with that, first and foremost, Amazon RDS SQL Server is always license included. So what that means is whatever, you don't have to worry about bringing your own license or purchasing your own license at all. When you spin up an instance of RDS, the license for SQL Server, if you're choosing, we actually have 5 different engines for RDS, but if you choose SQL Server, that license is just automatically a part of that. Amazon EC2, that is certainly an option, but you do also have the option to bring your own license. And that is exactly why we see the difference here in the versions supported. Because currently 2012 through 2019 are the versions that Microsoft officially supports. Those are the only versions that we can launch for RDS license included. But on EC2, because you could bring your own license, you could theoretically, for instance, have SQL Server 2000 running in a dedicated host on Amazon EC2. In terms of editions, it's essentially the same in terms of the reasoning. The Express, Web, Standard, and Enterprise editions that are available on RDS, again, are linked to the license that you would get along with that instance. On EC2, there are additional options if you have, for instance, SQL Server Developer Edition. Just a side note on that, I strongly recommend, if you're not familiar with it already, I strongly recommend you become familiar with this. Developer Edition is, as the name implies, it's limited for development. It can also be used for certain test scenarios. It absolutely cannot be used for production, but for a development team, it's free. It's just a free download of a fully capable SQL Server instance. In fact, it has essentially the same capabilities as Enterprise Edition. It's just legally it can only be used for those limited use cases like development and test environments. But that's something that can be downloaded and installed on an EC2 instance, for example. Same if there are certain ways you can install SQL Server if you have your own MSDN license and you have SQL Server through that. That's something that there are ways to do that on EC2, but obviously not on RDS. Other things are more similar, but still some differences. So high availability, both RDS and EC2, you can have high availability. You can have an availability group. But on RDS, it's we manage that, whereas on EC2, you manage it yourself. Both RDS and EC2 support encryption, both support Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. So there are a lot of things that are similar, but the way that they're implemented is a little bit different. Another example is with patching and backups, as well as I mentioned the high availability. In all of those cases, they're obviously supported on both. The difference is we manage a lot of those, what we call the undifferentiated heavy lifting. We manage that for you. So whether a partner set it up for you or you set it up yourself, or if a partner set it up but you don't have a managed service contract with them, you know, and so you're thinking, well, I'll have to manage this myself. Those are all situations where RDS is very helpful, because you don't have to worry about the daily backups and patching to make sure you have the latest version, and or minor version upgrades, and high availability across availability zones. We will manage all of that for you. Now, obviously, if you chose to have Stratus10 install SQL Server for you and then continue to manage it for you, then that could be on RDS or EC2 if they're managing it for you. Either way, you wouldn't have to worry about those details. So like I said, there's a lot of similarities, a lot of differences as well, and it really comes down to understanding that and being able to choose the right option, which again is a great reason to work with Stratus10 and leverage their expertise in that. In terms of high availability, and this is not something we're going to do in today's lab, but just so that you understand how it would work in your own environment. If you are running SQL Server, I do strongly recommend high availability for production workloads. And the way that we would do that is with one instance in each of, in this case, 2 different availability zones. Hopefully you're familiar with the way our availability zones work, but essentially these are isolated locations that are, they're on a separate floodplain, separate power grid. They are isolated, but very low latency between them inside that region. And so that's what allows us to have this automatic failover and high availability, even though these are separate data centers that are miles apart. So yeah, if you're setting up SQL Server on EC2, again, whether you're doing it yourself or you're having a partner do it for you, this is how we recommend doing it. And in fact, if we're setting it up with RDS, it's a little bit easier, as you'll see when we go through the lab. You just tell it, I want high availability. We're essentially going to do the exact same thing. It's going to be set up across 2 availability zones. The big advantage in this case is you don't have to worry about, well, how do I set that up? Like I said, you basically just tell it, I want high availability. It's a managed service. We're going to handle all of the details for you for how that is configured. And then finally, if you want to go to a multi-region disaster recovery configuration, that's when, like I said, you would go to a second region. You'll notice everything on the left here is essentially what you saw previously, whether it's EC2 or RDS, works the same way. You would have that one region, multiple availability zones, but now we're going to a second region for the disaster recovery. You'll also notice, it's subtle, but you'll notice here that we have a synchronous commit, automatic failover inside the region, asynchronous commit, manual failover when you go to the second region. And that's just simply the latency. We try to minimize the latency as much as possible between regions. We are limited by the speed of light. So no matter what we do, obviously you're going to have more latency going from, say, US East to Japan versus 2 different data centers, both in US East. And so that's why we recommend the automatic failover within the region and the manual failover between regions. So that's all I want to cover to give you a background on, what we're going to do in the lab today. What we're actually going to do in this lab is set up an RDS instance, and then we'll have some time while that's building to answer any questions or make sure everyone's on at the same point in the lab and help you guys with any, like I said, any questions you may have. And then once that's up and running, we can use SQL Server Management Studio. We have an EC2 instance that's created as part of the lab that can be used to connect to that RDS instance. That EC2 instance itself has SQL Server already running on it, and so you can see how you can connect to the local EC2 instance as well as connect to the RDS instance. And you'll notice from a SQL Server perspective, there's no difference, right? They're both there are some differences under the covers, don't get me wrong, but they're both SQL Server. You could create databases, create tables, views, procedures, etc. in both. You connect to them both with SQL Server Management Studio, etc. So with that, I would like to get started on that. Like I said, we're going to have some time later to answer any questions. Just give me a moment. I want to make sure I have all of the lab accounts set up for us here today. Looks like a few of them are still initializing. I don't know why that is. I thought they'd be ready by now. But I think we should be good to go. So what we're going to do is I would like everyone to see, Catherine, what's the best way I can provide these links to everybody?
Thank you for asking. I just posted them in the chat.
Oh,
So there's a
fantastic.
PDF to the latest version of the guide, and the link to the lab login is also in the chat.
Perfect. And one other thing everyone's going to need before you ask, when you go to that URL that Catherine provided, it's going to ask you for an event hash. And I'm going to post that now. So that is what you'll enter in that dashboard. You'll enter that event hash. And I'm going to give you guys some time to download that updated guide and connect to those sessions. All right, so we got some people starting the lab. Please let us know if you're having any trouble getting that started. Oh, I apologize. That is absolutely correct. Some people are saying that this is the lab, it hasn't started yet. I apologize. I initialized it and forgot to actually click the start button. So everything is ready. It's just not officially started. So yeah, I just did that. So I apologize for that. It is now officially started. Okay, and everything is initialized as it should be now, which is good. So I'm not sure why there was a delay on that. So we do have several people connected already. give everybody just another minute to get connected. And then what I'll do is I'll actually go through the lab myself, just in case anybody, some people would rather just, you know, watch more of a demonstration, and that's perfectly fine. Or also if you're trying to do it, but stuck on something, it always helps to see what somebody else is doing. So I'm going to give people another minute to get started, and then I'll work on that.
I've now unmuted attendees, or you can choose to unmute if you wish to ask questions. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start working through the lab myself. I see some people have already started. That's fantastic. But like I said, if anybody wants to just watch, or if you've started but you have any questions, either way, I can go through it and help you out. So I'm going to share my screen here. Just give me a moment. Oh, actually, here, let me disconnect this. I was already connected to a previous one to ensure everything was working. So I'm going to disconnect from that, and I'll start from the beginning here. Gonna make sure I have the right screen. That's always important. All right. Can everyone, Catherine, can you see the team dashboard on my screen now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So once you've connected using the URL and you entered your enter the team hash, you should see something like this, just a team dashboard. I could go ahead and set my name if I want to. You don't need to do that, but it helps as Chris is monitoring this, it helps him to know who's on which team. So, you know, if somebody does have a question or anything, he can help out. And now I'm going to go ahead and go to the console. And so when I click that, you'll get this option. You really don't need to worry about for this particular lab. You don't need to worry about this. This is the button you need, this open console button, which will take us directly to the AWS console. Okay. So if we now, and again, just as a reminder, if you didn't already do so, please download the updated lab guide that Catherine posted earlier, because that's what I'm going to be working through. So the first thing we're going to do is go to RDS. Everything we're doing, by the way, is going to be in this Northern Virginia, US East 1 region. Please don't change the region because everything is configured to work from there. These are, just as a reminder, everybody, this will not affect, if you have your own AWS account, this will not affect that at all. This is completely separate from that. So nothing we're doing here is going to affect anything that you already have. If you already have an AWS account, it won't charge anything back to you, or I don't know if you have any concerns about that. These are temporary lab accounts that we created that will exist for this session in a couple hours afterwards, and then they'll all go away. So first thing we're gonna do here is click this create database button. You'll see right here. At this point, I don't have any database instances currently running. So I'm going to create a database, and we use the term database here, but as you can see, we have different engine types, and different engines use different terminology. Technically, for SQL Server, we're not creating a database, we're creating an instance. But on using general terminology, the term here is database. We're going to create a SQL Server instance. I'm just going to leave the RDS option there, and we can leave it as Express. Obviously, there are other options. Then we can name the database. I'll just call this Stratus10 Lab for what I'm doing here. And I recommend leaving this admin username for this. Obviously, you could change it if this was a production environment or whatever, but for this lab, I recommend just leaving it. And then just put something simple for the lab that you're going to remember. And I already messed up what I was typing. And that's going to make it more difficult to get access to my instance. So I'm just doing a simple password for this. Again, there are various options you can choose for an instance. I don't want you to think that, oh, if I'm using RDS, I'm only going to be able to get 2 gigs of RAM and 2 vCPUs. You certainly can get larger instances than that. This is just showing the smaller ones here, but for instance, I could do, if I get rid of this burstable class, or if I don't, let's see, if we do, I've got to get rid of that option, which is not letting me do that right now. But there are larger instance sizes available. But like I said, for this lab, we don't need to worry about that. It's possible, actually, that might be why I can't do a larger one. It might be that it's limited for this lab. Again, storage, same thing. We don't need to make it bigger right now. We could, as this says here, you could go up to 16 terabytes. There's no reason to do that. We're not going to set up a 16 terabyte database in the next hour. We just need some storage. So I'm going to leave that at 20 gigabytes. I'll leave the auto scaling, but it won't be necessary for this lab. Here's where we are going to make a change though. Rather than set this up in the default VPC or create a new VPC, as part of the lab, we've created a VPC that already has certain things set up, like security groups that you want for connecting to your RDS database instance. So we're going to choose that. You see it already has this subnet group already set up. We don't need public access because we're going to have an EC2 instance that we're going to use to connect to the database. For the security groups, I mentioned before, we have one already created. So we actually don't want default, but we do want this SQL security group right here. Not the public security group, but the SQL security group is the one that you want for the RDS instance. We don't really have a preference for the availability zone. And the rest of this, we don't really have a preference for. So at this point, you should be able to create your instance. So I'll just go back up here in case anybody had any questions about that. Basically, I selected SQL Server, RDS, Express, 2019. I gave it a name, picked a password.
If you undo Express, it'll probably let you change your instance.
Yeah,
class.
that's what I was thinking. If I picked a different one, I could probably do that. That might be why I was doing that.
Just a guess. I have no idea.
Yeah. See, now that I chose standard, I can get, you know, much different, much larger instance sizes. Although I'm sure that'll raise a flag if I start creating these larger instances. I was going to want to know why I needed to do that. And the answer is I don't need to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead back and change this back to Express, which is all I really need for today's lab. If we were doing a lab, and we do have more advanced labs, if I was doing a more advanced lab showing you how to set up, you know, an availability group with a readable secondary, for instance, or something like that, then obviously I would not be doing Express Edition, and it would be a little bit different there. And again, we just have simple storage. This is the important part that will mess you up if you don't change this. We need to make sure that you're creating it in the correct VPC. That is the one that your name, it will look a little bit different than this, but it will say RDS SQL somewhere in the name. And then again, in the security groups, you want to make sure that you do not have the default one, but you do have this SQL security group selected for that. Then you're going to create the database. Now that I think about it, I wish I had clicked that button sooner because it takes a little while to do that part. But hopefully everyone else is ahead of me. But what we can do is just go over here. Oh, there it is. Okay, so it should, I was thinking to myself, it should refresh, but I'll just do it. But there. So now we're back to here. And now you can see the instance and it's creating. So while that's happening for me, as Catherine was saying earlier, everyone has the option to unmute themselves and talk. If you want to let me know if anybody's having trouble getting to that point where the database is creating, or sorry, the instance is creating. All right, let's see. Somebody's asking a question here. So you went to the dashboard, you signed in to get my one-time password. Oh, that might be, oh, that's right, because we connect differently as employees. So how far are you getting when you
I'm getting just to the, yeah, I got to that console there, create Linux, I think. And hang on, let me go over. I tried to go to I got to the team dashboard event Stratus10 workshop introduction. And pretty much I have no options on this page other than AWS console or SSH key. Yes, that page.
Okay. So if you click the AWS console button,
Which I did. And then it says use East as one. And then
Right.
are you selecting Linux or Windows, or does it matter?
you don't need to worry about that at all. Just if you just click this open console button.
Oh, okay. That's where I skipped. Hey, look, it works a lot better, maybe.
If you do that, then that should open the console for you. And then from there, that's when you want to click on the RDS link and start working through that.
Switch to new console home. I don't care. All right.
So you should be hopefully at the point now where you can create
Build a solution, is that it?
build a solution. There should be an option. So when you open the console, let me see if it'll take me back to the beginning part for that.
New AWS console home will replace experience, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah.
So then there should be an option to go to RDS.
So where am I?
You can put it in search too. If
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not
If
there.
it's not there, you can just type up here RDS and it'll come up.
It's trying. Ah, now I'm at the create database. Life is much better.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's see, we have another question here. Which version would you recommend? I mean, you can, for this lab, I would just leave the default, which is the 2019 latest version. Obviously, if you were creating a SQL Server database as part of a migration, you need to migrate the data from on premises, then you probably want to create the same version that you're currently running. Or if you want to, change versions, that's always an option too. So it really, it depends on your situation. What is the quote best version, but typically I would go with the newest. I'll get to the question on burstable in a second, but no, in this, so I'm not sure the question about the VPC. You can create a new VPC for this particular lab. That's not what we want to do because we've already created a VPC that already has the appropriate security group in it to enable you. So keep in mind, we're saying no to public access for RDS. So what we've done instead is we've created an EC2 instance that we can remote into. And then we've created a security group that says that these RDS instances can be accessed from that EC2 instance. So that's why we want to pick that existing VPC and that existing security group because that's already been all set up for us. In terms of the instance class, so burstable is very similar to EC2 if you're familiar with that. It's basically just the burstable instances are work such that there's a certain amount of time that it can run at a faster speed, essentially a burst of speed for that amount of time. And typically, because that's the way it works, it doesn't run at full speed all the time, it's just temporarily a little burst of speed. it's not something that's usually used for SQL Server. For a lab like this is perfectly fine. For Express Edition, it might be fine. And for certain workloads, it's fine. Just a few months ago, I was working with a customer that they were running SQL Server primarily to run SSIS or SQL Server integration services. And they had these ETL packages that ran at night. They didn't run all the time, but every night they ran this package that put a heavy load on the system. And so what we decided for them, the best thing to do was, and when I say best, in terms of, you know, a lot of the decision process is, well, you know, what's the most efficient, you know, financially to achieve the performance that I need. And in their case, it was one of these T instances that during that time at night could burst for faster performance. It didn't really matter if later it didn't have that high of performance, because the workload that it needed to handle during the day was a lot lower than what it needed during that short period at night. So I hope that answers that question. If not, you can come off mute or, you know, rephrase your question or whatever. So let me go back. I keep reminding myself that I'm sharing my screen, and let me go back to here. And okay, so it has created the instance and it's configuring monitoring for it, but I'm going to try to jumpstart things. Even though it hasn't officially 100% been set up, I should be able to connect. So I'm going to copy this endpoint right here. Now I should point out, for this particular lab, we're just sticking with the default for SQL Server, which is port 1433. If for whatever reason you are not using that port for your RDS instance, then in order to connect to it in this next step, you would need this endpoint and you would need to know the port. But 1433 is the default, so we don't have to worry about that in this particular case. But I just wanted to explain that. So I'm going to copy my endpoint here, and I'm going to don't know why that always goes to my other screen. I'm going to, that's not what I meant to do. I apologize. I started telling it to connect to that from this is to remote into my RDS instance, which will not work. So I apologize. As I was explaining to Catherine earlier, I'm in the process of writing a new lab guide, and unfortunately that is not completed yet. So this part I'm going to explain a little bit better what you need to do if you haven't already. If you haven't figured it out already yourself, that's fantastic. But if not, I'll walk you through it. It's pretty simple. Basically, what we're going to do is go to EC2, which might be right here, or if it's not, we could just type EC2 right up here in the search and we'll get there. So the reason we're doing that is I'm not going to assume you have SSMS running on your local machine, and we didn't make the RDS instance available publicly anyway, even if you did. But what we did do is, for each team in this lab, in this workshop, we pre-built this EC2 instance that allows you to remote into that, and it has SSMS running. So I'm going to go here to, here's my public DNS for my EC2 instance. I'm going to copy that. That's what I'm actually going to remote into. That'll work much better for me than trying to remote into an RDS instance. All right, for this we're going to put RDS SQL /admin. And the password is super complicated. It's just Amazon 1 with an exclamation. So I'm going to put these in the chat for everybody. So you're going to use that as your remote instance. Okay, now it's not giving me the option to see it. So I'll just type it over here. I'll just type it in the chat. It'll be easier. All right, give me a second. All right, so if I do that, don't keep asking me about that. Now I can connect to my remote instance and it'll start setting me up as a user. There was a question about the instance. I just want to make sure I'm not getting too far ahead of people. Is that a question about the EC2 instance or the RDS instance? Okay, EC2. I thought so. I may have gone too fast there. I apologize. So what you want to do is I decided to keep 2 tabs open. You don't need to do that, but I'm a tab guy. If I only have 30 tabs open, it's kind of small. So what you could do here is just type EC2 up in your search bar. And then click on the very first thing that comes up, which is EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud. So I'll pause there for a second. Make sure you got to that screen. If anyone is not yet at this point, please let us know if you're having any issues. That's fine if the database is still creating. You can do this while the database is creating. You just won't be able to connect yet with SSMS, but you can still do this to get to start on the remote access part to make sure that that's going to work. Also, don't worry about this load balancer API. These lab accounts are limited in what they're allowed to set up, and we're not dealing with load balancers in today's lab anyway, so we don't have to worry about that. So really, as soon as you tell it to create the database and confirm that, okay, it has started creating, then you can go ahead, go to this step, you go to EC2. Okay, now we're at the EC2 dashboard and you want to go to this instances running. We already have the one instance that's created. And when you get to there, just click on that and you should get something like this at the end. You notice the name just is, it just indicates that it's a Bastion host. It's actually a little bit more than just a Bastion host in this particular case. And once you get to here, like I said, you just select that, you'll get this bottom part. Then you just want to come over here and copy this public DNS. Or public IP address if you prefer to use that, obviously using the DNS. And that's what you're going to put into your remote desktop tool, whatever you use. So if you just let me know once you got that far, and then for the username and password, like I said, that's what I had put in the chat before. It's RDS SQL /admin. and then Amazon with a capital A, Amazon 1 exclamation for the password. Again, I always feel compelled to say this. No, that is not a super secure password, but also no, these accounts won't even exist in a few hours. So it's something we can get away with in a lab, but I feel compelled to recommend you don't make a password just Amazon 1 for a production workload environment. So let me know if anybody is having trouble getting to this point where you can remote into that instance. I'll pause right there for a moment. All right, I don't see or hear any concerns from anyone, so I'm going to keep moving. At this point, I'm just going to go right here. And I find personally the easiest way to do this is just as soon as you hit the Windows button, just type SSMS. Which is SQL Server Management Studio. And it should take you right to here. If for some reason that does not work for you, you can also just go to here and, or is it under tools now? This is why I do it that way, because I think now it's under here. Yeah. And then you can go to there. So I said, either way, you can go through the start menu from SQL Server tools, or you can just type SSMS and it'll come up. While we're waiting for that, I'm just going to switch back to the console and my other tab for RDS, and we're just going to check. Okay, well now it's backing up, but now it exists. It's doing that initial backup for us, as we talked about before with RDS. We handle the backups for you, so you don't have to worry about that part. All right, so now Management Studio is ready. Now, what it has in here by default, this is the name of my local instance. And it's going to use Windows authentication just to connect locally to that instance. And that's fine. If I remember correctly, we don't have any user databases, but we do have an instance. Yeah. So there's no database here, but this is the local instance of SQL Server. It's standard SQL Server. Well, actually, I don't know what edition. I don't mean edition by that, but it's just typical SQL Server, I guess, better way of putting that. I can create a database. I could create a database this way. I could create it through a script. I can, actually, that's one thing I could do right here is just. So we're running, okay, this is running SQL Server 2017. Oh, and this is running Express. Okay. All right. So that's great. That's our local database, but that didn't do anything with RDS yet. Just to be clear, that's just connecting to that local EC2 instance. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to here, and now I'm going to get that endpoint that I started talking about before for the RDS endpoint. So again, in case we're not all on the same screen here, this is my RDS I was going to say dashboard, really it's just the list of databases I have for RDS. Right now I just have the one. I'm going to click on whatever name you called yours, doesn't matter. Click on that, and then that will take you to here to get that endpoint. And we'll just copy that. And you can't use that for remote desktop like I accidentally tried earlier, but you can use it for SSMS. So I'm going to put that in there. Now we did not set this up for Windows authentication, but you can do Windows authentication for RDS. We didn't set ours up that way. So we're going to use SQL Server authentication. And that's where we'll do that. If you remember back to when we set up the RDS database, there was an admin user, and then it asked you to type in a master password. And that's what you're going to put in there and connect. And now I'm connected, and you'll see it looks exactly the same. The only difference is there is this database, which that's just part of the administration of RDS, that separate database. You don't have to worry about that. But it's SQL Server. Okay, so okay, let me go back. Now that I've gotten that far, let me go back. Again, here, it looks like some people are having some questions on some of the steps. I apologize, I may have gone a little too quickly. So when you're here and your database is creating, it doesn't matter if it's already available or not, it's creating, at least it started creating. That's when we can go over to EC2 and figure out how to remote into that machine. So again, we're just going to type EC2 over here in this search bar. That'll take us to here, where you should have one instance already running. Because again, as part of the lab, we pre-created this one instance. And when you get to there and you click on it, that's where you'll get this public DNS for a remote desktop. You're going to remote into that instance. To do the remote desktop, you're not going to do that from the console directly from your browser. If you're on a Windows machine, you'll use, you can use, well, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. I just use the simple remote desktop connection. There's a different one if you have multiple, if you want to be able to connect to multiple machines. But this is the simplest one I find for this purpose. And sorry, I apologize. Someone said they lost. You can come off mute if you want to explain, but that's fine if you don't want to do that. But someone said they lost the last step. Which step were you referring to? I apologize. I didn't notice at what point you typed that. Okay. So did you already remote into your EC2 instance? Following these steps, you go into the EC2 part of the console, get this public DNS, and use that to remote in. So once you've done that, and you're here, well, you wouldn't be here just yet, you'd be here. Then you want to go here to Tools and Management Studio, or like I said, you can just type SSMS Either way, you're going to get to the SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so once you're there, now if you jump back to the console for a moment and you go to the RDS portion of the console and you go to that instance, that's where we're going to use this endpoint. So if you copy that endpoint and then you go back to your remote desktop, I don't know what I currently have copied, so I'll just recopy that. You go back to your remote desktop, that's where you're going to, so you come over here and you just right click and say connect. I apologize. I've been using this for so many years. I always do it the same way. I'm sure there's, oh, here it is. Like, I know there's another way to do this. I just don't remember that. So you can click connect and then database engine, or you can right click on any one of these and say connect. Either way, you're going to get this. And when you get that pop up, that's where you'll paste that RDS endpoint, which at the beginning of it, you should see whatever name you typed in. I happen to type in Stratus10 lab because that's what we're doing today. Then you're going to see something that you did not make up, but that AWS made up for you, which would be something like this. And then you'll see US East 1 RDS. That part is going to be the same for everybody. This ending, US East 1 RDS, AmazonAWS.com.
So I have a question. I'm at the remote desktop connection.
Yep.
And I paste in the server and then it asks for my credentials and it wants to log on. I'm doing it from my local desktop. It wants me to log on with my, corporate domain.
Yeah. So what you want to do there is
different account.
Yeah, you do the more choices, use a different account, and that's where you want to put RDS SQL /admin. And then the password is, you won't be able to see it when I type it, so I'm just going to type it up here, even though you want to type it for the password. The password is Amazon1 !
Oh, and look at that, it works. You gave me an authenticated user.
Yep, there you go. I'm canceling that only because I'm already connected in here. And then that basically, it takes a few seconds to initialize whatever, but that should get you to, oh, I can't minimize because this pop-up is here, but that should basically get you to here. And then you can,
so we're spinning up a managed instance here. We're not spinning up an instance that's
well, we have an EC2 instance that I wouldn't say it's a managed instance. EC2 is what we call a self-managed. But as part of this lab, we've pre-configured an EC2 instance with the ability for you to remote into that instance. Again, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but security is so important to me. I feel it's really important to say a lot of these things. So the way we have these instances set up, you were all able to remote into the instance without any problem. Well, I don't know what your IP address is. I would not recommend that typically for a production workload, right? There are ways in a security group, for instance, you could log it down to a single IP address to say that's the only IP that can get in, or this set of IPs, or this range, or there's ways to do that. Obviously, we did not do that in this case for this lab, but that's because this is only a lab. In a production environment, I would have recommended doing it differently. But to simplify the lab,
passwords to password, in fraud environments. Very safe.
So for this lab, we're using this instance as a way to, if you remember back to when you set up RDS, you told it use this specific security group. That's because that security group is configured. In fact, I can go ahead and show you that. We have the security groups set up. So these are the 4 security groups for the VPC that we're using. This is just the default PC. We don't worry about that. Can expand this to see the full name. Okay, so this is the one for the EC2 instance. And you'll see it allows remote desktop from anywhere. That's
Right.
the thing I'm saying. Like normally you would never do that. You would do something more like my IP address, or you would pick some sort of, smaller range or whatever. You wouldn't just say anyone in the world can remote into this. But this is a lab that's only going to exist for a couple of hours. And so we're allowing that in this particular case. But then what we did do is you'll notice this, well, actually it's really this you want to see. This security group ID, this 0C86 is the only one that starts with that, right? If you look at the SQL security group, the way it's configured, here it is. It allows SQL connections only from that security group.
Right.
And that's why we're remoting into that EC2 instance, but then the EC2 instance can access this RDS instance, even though the RDS instance is not public. So you wouldn't be able to do it. Even if you had SSMS on your own laptop, you wouldn't be able to access RDS from there. Make sense?
Indeed it does.
So now we've got SQL Server locally, and we have SQL Server over here. I can run that same version check over there, and you'll see now it's running 2019, whereas the local one was running 2017. If anybody is interested, I'll show you one other little trick you can do. It's one of my favorites. So if you go up here to view and you say you want to see registered servers, you can register servers up here that's different from connecting to a server down below. Make sure I'm doing the right. Okay, that's that. And what that's going to do, I can test that. That worked. That's great. So now I've got 2 registered servers, the local EC2 and the remote RDS one. The reason I like that is it allows me to do fun things like this. Okay, that's all good. Okay. We're going to call that one EC2. And we're going to call this one RDS, just to make that easier. Okay. Anyway, so now what I can do here is I can run this, and it runs it for both servers and shows. So I was changing that just to show you this server name is not what name you put here if you did change it. It's the actual name that SQL Server is using to connect to it. But you can run queries for both, and it will show you, in this case, the version that's running on both, or so in this case, it's saying, okay, the RDS one has 5 databases and the local one has 4. Well, that's because the RDS one has this extra RDS admin.
And it's even better when you use central management server.
It's been a little while since I've done this one. There's a way to remove the system ones.
Or DBID greater than 4.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so there's the one for RDS. Yeah, I used to live in Management Studio and SSIS, but now it's a little bit different.
So when you set up your database inside the AWS environment, now your backups are being automatically managed, your database backups. If you create a database that's in full recovery mode, you're going to have to create and manage your own database backups, correct?
On EC2 or RDS?
I don't know. Where do you have us build? Are we EC2?
So on EC2, yes, it's self-managed. You would have to manage it yourself. On RDS, no, we manage the backups for you. In fact, if you tell RDS, I want to create a, so we did a.
So you're running SQL as a service is what you're doing in RDS.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
No worries.
Yeah. So if I go back here and I say SQL Server like we did originally, right? But I say I want standard edition and I want to run a production environment that's multi-AZ. It's automatically going to actually spin up 2 instances. One is your active instance and the other one is passive, and it'll
Boy, that's old terminology.
yeah. Well, I don't know what terminology everyone's familiar with, so I try to go back to the basics, but it'll spin those up and we'll manage the backups, the updates, the failover, all of that is managed by us as part of that. Like you said, it's a managed service.
Well, thank you. This is the first SQL environment I've built in AWS, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, glad I could help. I don't know how much time we have left, but I'd be remiss if I did not make sure I introduce Kevin, because especially in a case like that where this is the first time you're doing it. I always recommend to people, don't forget about our partners. A lot of people, at least in my experience, when I'm talking to people, people are used to the notion of if there's a middleman, I'm going to pay more money, right? The example I use is pizza. If I want to go get a pizza, it's cheaper for me to go there and get it. Let's exclude my time and the gas and all that, right? But excluding
Domino's
that,
will pay you $3 now to go.
it's cheaper for me to get it myself than to pay someone to deliver it to me. And if there might be a delivery fee depending on where I'm getting it from, there's certainly tipping the driver, it's going to cost more. But I always recommend working with a partner because it's actually the opposite for us. You're almost always going to save money working through a partner. I say that for a number of reasons. Number one, you work with somebody like Stratus10. These guys are already experts on this stuff. This is not the first time they're spinning up an EC2 instance or an RDS instance, right? They've been doing this for years. So it's going to be faster to do whatever it is you're trying to do. It's going to probably be a better configuration. The instance itself might be more efficient because they might be aware, okay, you think you need an instance at this level, but if we analyze what you're running on premises and based on that analysis, or what we call an assessment, then this is actually what you can run on AWS that would be equivalent and save some money there. And then also we have funding programs available to our partners to help to help you save money. So with that, Kevin, if you're available, I want to switch over to you for a little bit. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you guys are able to do to help customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tom. One thing I love being on a call with Tom is Tom peps us up and talks so highly of us. So that's great to have an advocate in our corner like that. So yes, as Tom mentioned, we at Stratus10 here are a advanced consulting partner. What this means is we have been in the business for a while. We've proven our chops. We have several competencies, migration, DevOps. We also hold a bunch of different service designations, which means we've specialized and shown our technical abilities and customer success in using certain AWS services. So we want to, just make sure if you ever have any questions, and even if you're just starting to consider doing a migration and you just want to know, where do I begin? Please reach out to us. We will be more than happy to work with you, understand what you currently have in place, understand any of your technical debts that you may be trying to retire as part of the migration, and really work with you to make sure you're getting the best ROI for what you're doing. So we do want to also let you know we do a free Windows license optimization assessment, and also do a total cost of ownership assessment if anyone is interested. Just basically saying, here's what you're spending in your data center or at your current provider. Here's what you'll look like if you go into AWS. And then even one step better, here's what you'll look like if you modernize and start using cloud services and features and get out of that extra licensing component and be able to really modernize and save on your applications. So with that said, please hit us up, let us know how we can help you. And I'll turn it back to Tom to wrap up the labs.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Oh, good. I see. Yeah, Catherine's posted the link for the free assessment. And that is, yeah, that's not something I would take lightly. I would definitely recommend that if you're at all interested in that, because it really is a valuable assessment. It's not a commitment to migrate everything you have to AWS or anything like that. But it's great. It's a great opportunity to get that assessment to understand, what you have and what it would take to get to AWS, what it would look like, etc. And so with that, I hope this was helpful to everybody. If anyone has any last minute questions, we can go through that now. Otherwise, I think we're ready. Hopefully most people have been able to finish the lab. Once you're able to connect to the RDS instance, that's basically it. If you want to, play around, run some queries, that's perfectly fine. But that's basically the point of the lab, was just to show how to do it, how to, set up that instance and what it looks like. But again, as I've said a few times, a lot of this I recommend, definitely work with Kevin and his team at Stratus10. They know this stuff really, really well and can help you not only answer questions of how to do it, but how to do it the most efficient way for your individual workloads.
Hey, Tom, are you able to hear me? This is
Yeah,
Manu.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good. So I actually missed the last steps So I was still unable to connect to the server, the endpoint for RDS. So after you get connected to the server with SQL Server authentication, what was the next step? I missed it.
Okay. So it sounds like, oh, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Let me do that. It sounds like
Hey, Tom,
you,
the VPC security group is actually still updating. But I accidentally clicked the wrong security group, so we don't have SSMS rights in the default group.
oh, okay.
I updated it. It's just taking a really long time to apply for some reason.
Okay. So she can't actually connect to the RDS instance right now, is what you're saying?
Yeah. The RDS instance is in the VPC default, not the actual custom modified default VPC that we created.
Gotcha. I don't know if you want to try, if you have access to that team console, if you want to try, just change that other, change the other security group to give it access.
I already told it to change, and it's just
taking a while. Okay.
It's taken a while. Like the VPC security group is stuck in removing this group and adding this group.
Okay.
So it's just taking time.
So it's in the process of doing it. Okay.
Yeah. That's okay, Tom and Chris. I just want to know the concept. So after connecting it, what generally we look into?
That's all we were trying to do, is just to show that you can connect. If you see my screen here, right, I'm connected to both the EC2 instance and the RDS instance. I connected up here with registered servers as well as in the Object Explorer, just to show that you're able to, and just to be able to run queries against both.
So there isn't really a task button. It's just play with
Yeah.
it. You're done.
Yeah, we have, this is an introductory lab for, introduction, sorry, to running SQL Server on AWS, on EC2 and RDS. We have more advanced labs that basically begin at this point. For instance, we have one lab where the lab starts out with, you already have an RDS instance and an EC2 instance, and you have a database on EC2, and I would like to migrate that database from EC2 to RDS. That's the focus of that lab, is starting from the point where we are right now and going through the process of configuring our database migration service and using it to migrate the data from EC2 to RDS. And we have other labs that deal with high availability and failover and management, for instance, on EC2 management with systems manager and different things like that. But for this particular lab, we're just demonstrating how to set up an instance and connect to it.
Got it, Tom. So I'm just checking the registered servers, like the database engine. I do see there like drop down local server groups EC2 and RDS. Will that show up automatically later, or I'm not pretty sure?
So I'm sorry, say it again. Where are you looking right now?
So to the left side, registered servers. Over there, I do see the database engine. So those will pop up after we log in to those endpoints.
So yeah, well, the registered servers, I named these EC2 and RDS. I just changed the names.
Okay.
Normally, what you would see if you don't do anything, what you would see is something like this. It won't be the exact same name, but whatever your EC2 instance is, and this would not be there at all. It would just have this. Once you're able to connect to the RDS instance, then what I did was I just added that RDS instance up here as well, just to allow me to run queries on both at the same time to show the information from both instances.
Got it. Got it. Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
Yes, yeah.
And as far as those other labs I was talking about, definitely, you know, reach out to Kevin or Catherine or someone at Stratus10, and they can help you work through those labs and demonstrate how to do some of those more advanced tasks if you're interested in that. But I think we're at time today.
I just want to say Stratus10 is also an immersion day partner, so we can host immersion days specifically for your company if that's of interest to you, where we'll dig into deeper, more technical labs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll wrap it up in just a moment. I just want to share our contact information to make sure you have it. Just a moment. Okay, well, thank you everyone for your time today. You know, just wanted to pop these couple resources up onto the screen. We have our resources here. Kevin mentioned the free optimized licensing and TCO assessment. I also posted a link to it in the chat. It truly is a great free assessment that we recommend you try out, and sometimes it even reveal that you would qualify for an accelerated migration. And